Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1983 romantic comedy titled Risky Business. Now, Risky Business runs for 1 hour and 39 minutes long. It is directed by Paul Brickman. It is produced by John Avnet and Steve Tisch. The script was also written by Paul Brickman. The score was done by Tangerine Dream. The cinematography was done by Bruce Surtees, and the editing was done by Richard Chu. And the stars of the movie are Tom Cruise, a very young Tom Cruise. Rebecca De Mornay is in it. Joe Pantoliano. We also have Nicholas Pryor, the late Janet Carroll. We have Richard Masur. We also have Curtis Armstrong. You may remember him as Booger from the 1984 movie Revenge of the Nerds. And let's see, we also got Bronson Pinchot before he rose to fame as Balky from Perfect Strangers. You know, when I saw this movie, it actually had all the ingredients to be a John Hughes movie. I mean, the year it came out, around 1983, that was when John Hughes's movies, romantic comedies, teen angst ridden type of comedies were, materializing. I mean, it had a lot of great ingredients to be sort of like a Brat Pack type of movie, like all the other Brat Pack members were in the 80s, from your Rob Lowe's to your Demi Moores to your Andrew McCarthy's to your Ali Sheedy's. And also another thing that this movie could have almost felt like a John Hughes film was the setting. Since the setting of this movie was in the rich suburbs of Chicago, I was kind of surprised, like, this movie should have been something John Hughes directed. This was actually what I could describe as the movie John Hughes didn't direct, didn't put his paw prints on, but this movie does pan out almost like a classic John Hughes 80s movie. But what surprised me was John Hughes was not even involved in this movie at all. I mean, it was written and directed by Paul Brickman, and nobody really knows who Paul Brickman is. And from the looks of things, from what I've read, he hasn't really done really that much in the Hollywood industry. I like to think of him kind of like in this movie. Paul Brickman could be almost like a poor man's John Hughes. But the thing about this movie is that it's anything but poor, and it feels just like something John Hughes could have done. All the workings were all there. Teen anxieties, rich Chicago neighborhood. You know, guy coming of age. Everything there. Spelled John Hughes. But the strange thing is, it had nothing to do with John Hughes. Go figure. So we have a very young Tom Cruise. He stars as Joel Goodson, a handsome young man from Chicago who takes advantage of his parents' house while they're away, with things just seem to go way beyond what he had anticipated. Sure, the plot of Risky Business about a promiscuous teenager befriending a likable hooker named Lana, played by Rebecca De Mornay, who's still not adjusted to the consequences that come with the job, may have qualities about it that are quite surreal. But in spite of the flaws of this movie, writer-director Paul Brickman does succeed to keep his audience on the edge of their seats for the long periods of time. I mean, such events that happens in this movie might seem like irony, but it also has, in spite of its surrealism, this movie could also have a bit of it could have happened. Sure, your parents go out and they put their faith and trust into you, and you're practically the king of the castle without really any the king or the queen of your castle without any royal subjects. So what do you do to break the monotony? You could throw a wild party, call up a few hookers, waste $300, $500 on garbage. Hell, even go as far as to drown your father's expensive Porsche through Lake Superior for all we know. And pretty much that's kind of like what happened in this movie. You know, these things could happen. Normally it doesn't. But this is Hollywood. So normal is actually abnormal. So, in spite of the flaws of this movie, writer-director Paul Brickman does succeed to keep his audience on the edge of their seats for long periods of time. Still relatively unknown at the time, Tom Cruise, in his most youthful role to date, plays a teenager who is the only son of wealthy Mr. and Mrs. Goodson, played by Nicholas Pryor and Janet Carroll, as they go off on a sabbatical leave and depends on young Joel to watch over the house while they're gone. I mean, what could go wrong? Well, in this movie, lots could go wrong. So Joel's friend Miles, played by Curtis Armstrong, advises Joel to take advantage of his newfound freedom. Joel starts eventually drinking liquor from the liquor cabinet, turns the stereo volume loudly as he dances in his underwear to Bob Seger classic, and starts bringing in prostitutes into his house for him and his teenage horny friends' pleasures. And from there, this movie turns its gears to the over-romanticized softcore erotic films, with its target audience being middle-aged people. And I think the reason why it would probably turn its attention to middle-aged people, well, because, maybe if you're growing up in the 80s, chances are this movie might bring back a bit of nostalgia. Back into a time when, you know, morals and where morals were a little more looser. I mean, it wasn't like absurd that movies revolving around horny teenage kids, particularly boys, looking at girls as nothing more than just pieces of meat. That was kind of like the frame of mind in the 80s. I know today, in the more politically correct world, that would not be particularly tolerant. With all the SJWs, all the social justice warriors and the feminazis out there, they would probably hate movies of this magnitude. But then again, hey, you know what? That's their opinion, that's their prerogative, and I won't hold anything against them. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. But back in the 80s, a lot of uh, political correctness was not the norm. We had movies like Porky's. Porky's was filled with misogyny. A lot of movies in the 80s was filled with misogyny, where women were actually looked upon as pieces of meat, or looked upon as just mere sex kittens. Not all movies, no, but a lot of them were. And unfortunately, this movie could probably fall in that category where misogyny seems to be pretty focal. I mean, pretty much most of the female characters in this movie are, a lot of them were kind of like in Rebecca de Mornay's territory. I mean, it's just kind of like they're there at the moment. I mean, I don't really kind of approve of that kind of smut. But back in the 80s, you could be a little bit loose. And besides, at the end of the day, just think about it. It's just a movie. If you don't like it, you never have to worry about seeing it ever again. But I actually thought this movie had a smooth flowing plot. It was easy to follow. We have actually relatable characters. I mean, I'm sure you've met a Joel Goodson type character before. Besides, it's not more than just, horny teens banging it with prostitutes. I mean, they also touch upon some more serious subjects like loss of innocence, capitalism, since Goodson's friends seem to have a bit of a one-track mind. Well, aside from girls and sex and car and fancy cars, they also have their obsession with making money, because that's what makes the world go round. They When they're not talking about girls, cars, and sex like the typical 80s teenage boy does, they also talk about capitalism, money, opportunity. Take the bull by the horns. And you see that hidden subliminally through all the zany, crazy stuff that happens in this movie. But I think this movie should not be taken as a dark theme. It is lighthearted, and it should not be taken like 100% seriously. There are moments of seriousness in this movie, but it's basically covered up with all the surreal laughter. And, it's not actually that bad of a date movie. If your girlfriend or has a sense of humor and is able to accept the fact that this is the frame of mind that a lot of 80s teens experienced, then I don't think they should have a problem. From there, the whole concept of sex for money depicted here feels absurdly casual, almost like a frat party. Kind of like where they play spin the bottle in hopes that the bottle points in their direction while they go off and engage in intercourse without any of them caring about the dangers of drugs or disease that could raise a cause of concern. But then again, the 80s morals were kind of more laid back than today's standards, where political correctness seems to be the main emphasis. And if Risky Business was to come out today, it would have easily been annexed in the theaters. Because let's face it, morals just seem to be somewhat much more tighter than in the 80s. So, like right before the AIDS epidemic took off, Risky Business would have never made it to the cutting room floor. It had to take the disease of AIDS to sort of get into the gist of, sex themed movies. Now, Risky Business is not hardcore porn. There's no gratuitous nudity or sex scenes, in spite the fact that a lot of the character or a lot of there is the main character, the main female character is a prostitute, and yeah, she has a pimp who's also her manager. But then again, if anything, it's a comedy, and you don't really see too many sex scenes, in spite the fact that for one night Joel's house was like a brothel, and yes, he was making money off of his friends just so that they could have a little bit of hiney to fulfill their evening. And he is taking advantage of his parents while they're on hiatus. But I didn't find anything like remotely offensive in any way, shape, or form. In fact, as a whole, it kept me intrigued as to like what would happen next. Because let's face it, Joel is not trying to not just to the only reason why he wants to turn his house into a brothel is also because, hey, he accidentally got drunk and drowned his father's car into a lake. And the repairs was pretty costly. And then, of course, things also got bad. Like when Guido the pimp started taking his parents' furniture, and of course, Lana's services was also in the $300 range. So he had to kind of pay off all of that. The guy was practically choiceless. He had no other alternative. And he needed to get these things all done before his parents get back. There was actually a funny scene, like during that time when he turned his house into a brothel. One of the representatives from Princeton University, because Joel applied to attend Princeton University, so a representative came in to interview him about, to discuss, the stuff that, pertaining to, his academic accomplishments. He seems to be a pretty smart kid. Pretty smart kid. He's got good grades. He's a great academic. But now, and in spite of all the weirdness and stuff like that, I gotta give hands out to Richard Masur for trying to keep a straight face through, even though he's playing an Uber series character. I gotta admit, that guy kept a straight face, Such underrated performance here by Richard Masur here. And he pulled it off very well, too. I gotta admit, the performances here were very, very well executed. And as a whole, most of the characters in this movie were pretty likable. And you think about this movie, with prostitutions, turning your house into a brothel. You may think that this may be a gratuitous sex movie, but it really isn't. And the sex scenes are very, 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 very few. You don't really actually ever see them. You don't really see that much nudity in this movie. You see more of it in Porky's, but you don't see it that much in Risky Business. Violence? No, there was no violence. Sexual innuendos, yes. Misogynistic language, plenty. Alcoholic and drugs, so and so here and there. But it's actually very mild. It might probably have the R rating because maybe for precautions. I mean, I would not recommend a young child to see this movie. This is more of an adult or late teen to early adult type movie. I would say maybe 16 or older should see this movie. If you bring your kid to see this movie, there's you gotta be retarded. I would not recommend it for a younger audience. And because of the content the movie is, the plot of the movie is not designed for a young kid to watch. And you would be ashamed of yourself, parents, if you let your kid watch a movie like this. But for the adults in you, if you could take the maturity of this movie and not take it seriously, you will enjoy this movie. It's not perfect, but I really think this was actually the movie that helped kind of launch Tom Cruise's career. Tom Cruise was still relatively unknown at the time. And I thought he actually played the role of a teenager quite well, even though at the time he was 21 years old. He was able to succeed in managing pretty well to play this part. I mean, and there was a whole bunch of other actors at the time who were up for the role of Joel Goodson. John Cusack was up there for that role. He would have been okay there too. I mean, he was at that age at the time, 18 years old. Let's see. There was also Matthew Broderick was also up for that role of Joel Goodson. I think I heard somewhere Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks, nah, he kind of looked he wouldn't do. He was kind of still a little bit too old for that. Keanu Reeves, I heard a rumor that he was supposed to play Joel Goodson. He would have been okay there too. Um, there was a few others too who were also up for it. But I think Tom Cruise did pull this off, and I think this was actually the beginning of a long going career for Tom Cruise. And I think if it wasn't for Risky Business, Tom Cruise probably wouldn't be where he is today. So, hats off to Tom Cruise in the movie that made him a star. And I think he pulled it off very, very well here. Lana, played by Rebecca De Mornay, may have set the teen up for many of the troubles he's faced while his parents were gone. And some of the things that he did, Joel had successfully managed to drown his father's his Porsche, and get under the gun of Lana's dangerous pimp Guido, played by Joel Pantoliano. Both incidents are proved costly. Joel agrees for one night to partner up with Lana as he turns his house into a brothel, which will help pay for the repairs while he and his friends take their horny pleasures to Lana's coworkers. And it's just strangely ironic that Joel found a new lease of coolness once he starts working off his payments by kind of working as a pimp himself. I mean, he shapes his outlook by sporting his hair in the middle. Typical 80s, right? He starts donning on Ray-Ban Wayfarer's sunglasses, which became, which actually started to become trendy thanks to this movie. I mean, back in the 70s, the sunglasses we had were kind of like the kind of sunglasses that Eric Estrada wore during his times when he was doing Chips. But once Risky Business came about, those Eric Estrada sunglasses became passe, and the Wayfarers started to become more of a trend-setting type of apparel for all you kids and teens who grew up in the 80s. Hey, it was a trendsetter in that period. And though I don't approve it, he does sort of place a cigarette to his mouth that truly spells out Bogart and Belmondo. There's no real moral passage to give out here, but hey, it's the 1980s, back when morals were looser than today's standards. I mean, sometimes I think some of these PC people just need to just cool off sometimes, be a little laid back. We can have a little fun in our lives. And I don't think fun should be used in an offensive frame of mind. I mean, sure, we could set limits, but then again, shouldn't everybody have fun? The movie is definitely really high on style, and it stands above most romantic comedies of the 1980s and beyond. But to be honest, this movie wasn't just taken as a teen comedy at all. It's definitely for satirical purposes to exploit the 1980s materialistic integrity that was cleverly incognito as a teen comedy film. All the subliminal messages about capitalism was really like hidden in and was used as a disguise to pan out as a teen comedy. The young cast who became bigger stars later on excelled in the material that was given to them. Even Curtis Armstrong himself keeps himself from being too much of an annoyance. He plays off a bit more subtle. Tom Cruise and Rebecca De Mornay strive from their roles as they avoid the trap of playing stereotypical characters, mainly due to the precision and timing of Paul Brickman's direction and script. It kind of saddens me that Brickman, like I said, has not done very much in the Hollywood industry. And, I'm sure probably this movie itself was the inspiration of many movies that John Hughes made in the 80s. Maybe even, well, actually not the 90s. By the time the 90s came around, I think John Hughes was kind of more lenient towards more kid-friendly family comedies. He kind of like weaved into kind of like the Home Alones, the My Girls, the to that kind of lighthearted stuff. But in the 80s, Hughes actually did touch upon these kind of movies, and I think this movie could have been the inspiration for a lot of movies that John Hughes made over the years. Maybe with different themes, maybe with different, plots, different stories, but it does center kind of around that kind of magnitude. And this is truly an amazing movie. Definitely, if you're a fan of 80s themed movies like this one, I'm pretty sure you'll be in for a treat. And nobody should be offended by the misogyny that this movie has, because this is a different time period. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Because in the end, it is a wild ride. So with that said and done, if I was to give a scale out of 10, I would definitely give Risky Business an 8.5. So I guess this ends my rider review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. Just remember, be kind, be courteous, and don't be rude. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Carruth Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.